know thy works. Again, showing his omniscience. Remember the eyes that are able to pierce and see. He knows their works. And that's similar to all of them. Each offers a promise to him that overcometh. And notice also it's in the singular. It's not to them that overcometh, as the church. It's to him, the individual. Also, the same concluding sentence, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Plural. Not only unto the church, that it was specifically written, but unto the churches. Now these 7 epistles are divided into 2 groups, one of 3 and one of 4. The first 3 letters, the exhortation, is followed by the promise. The last 4, the order is reversed. It has a promise and then gives the exhortation, the plea. It's just interesting. There must be some reason. Some, they can't really, as more commentaries come out, more people look into this, because they're going to see it, but they've noticed that there's this first 3 and then the 4th. Some have divided them differently for those 3 and 4, for time-wise. Now, the church is viewed practically. There are 3 ways to view the letters to the 7 churches. The first method is basic. First and foremost, these are letters dictated by the risen Lord to 7 literal churches in the Western Asia and Western Asia Minor, toward the end of the 1st century in the Christian era. So that's the first way. The second way is going to be seen to those throughout history. And then finally, a third one, it's a third kind of view, and it could be true, as we'll see. And I don't see how much bearing it would have practically, but that of illustrating what church history is like. Each church representing a time period. Anyways, Ephesus, and there's a little bit of background in each city. Remember your studies that are due too. Ephesus was located in a city that was once the chief port of Asia Minor. Its harbor was given to change because of its continual silting from the areas. The off-run from the certain river, it would silt up, and they would actually one time have to dredge it and stuff. What was water became land. What was land became water. This shifting character of the city is reflected in the Lord's letter for the Ephesians assembly. Once so strong in its love for Him, Ephesus is seen by Him as shifting away, falling away. And it's interesting, as we go through, that's why I wanted the background studies done to the books. It seems, and it's really kind of interesting, it seems that the character of the city, the church, the people meeting together of that seem to take on the characteristics of that city spiritually. And as you go through each one, you see the background. It seems to relate. Not only does the Lord use things that are right in their locality, things that He can identify with, but it seems like the problem that the city had generally is what the church would experience, which kind of makes sense. You sleep with a dog and you wake up with the fleas. You know, it rubs off on you. And it'd be interesting. One other time I thought of, but I won't do it, was to write, using the general things, to write a letter to the church at Sault Ste. Marie, or the church at Goulais. And then go through and find, okay, what's the rough historical thing? Just like we did one of Ephesus. Now, what is the rough historical background of Goulais? How it started? What are the people like? And then try to see, is that similar to the church? Some of the problems that Goulais experiences, is this the same kind of problems that come into the believers take with them? And what's that? Well, it could be. That's a good point. So there's something. What causes that in the human nature? Like what, because of that flooding, what does that cause? It causes instability. You don't know if your land's going to be there the next day. It's no security. Well, maybe within the assembly, maybe there's no security in spiritual things. And so it'd be really interesting to do that one time. I want to do that for assignment, but I thought maybe there was too much already. But it'd be practical to do that, because maybe you'll see, well, this is it. And then what exhortations can you give from the Lord to show you can have security in Him? He's the rock that will not be moved. He's not the sand. He's the true foundation. And, you know, it can be very practical. But we'll go on. So Ephesus, and their locality not seem to have an effect upon them, and the Lord related it to their spiritual need. Smyrna itself claimed to be the birthplace of Homer, who was a great philosopher. And its coins bore his image. Very proud of him. It was a wealthy commercial city renowned for its faithfulness to Rome. The Lord's letters underlines the faithfulness as well as the fearfulness of the Smyrnan believers. The name of the city reflects the word myrrh, an aromatic spice that gives forth its fragrance when crushed and bruised, hence the reference by the Lord to suffering. In 600 BC, the city was destroyed by the Lydians, and for 4 centuries its name was lost to history. Ultimately, it was restored and became again an autonomous Greek city. It was also practically obliterated by an earthquake, but again it revived. It was dead and is alive. These are actual terms that are used. The city of Pergamus has been described as a combination of a pagan cathedral city, a university town, and a royal residence. It was famous for its medical center and for its magnificent pagan temples. The temple dedicated to how'd you say that? Oh, they said I need a breath. Asclepios, yeah. The god of medicine was renowned. The most conspicuous, thank you, object in this temple was the wreathed serpent, the symbol of medicine even yet. Many take it, they thought that the stick and the serpent is in reference to Moses and the people in the land. It's not. It's from this pagan god. Asclepios, Asclepius was often referred to as Savior. It might be this fact that caused the Lord to refer to Pergamus or Pergamum, either way, as the place of Satan's throne, because of the serpent symbol and all that, where Satan dwelleth.
Is that where they get purgatory from that city? Like
the doctrine of?
Right.
No, they get that from one of the books in the Apocrypha.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just thought it was similar.
Similar, yeah. But interesting, I didn't look up exactly what that word means. It'd be interesting to find out. I'm sure it has a purpose too. On the other hand, the reference may be to the enormous altar of Zeus, where that is talked about where Satan dwelleth, which dominated the city and which could be seen for miles. In 133 BC, Attalus III bequeathed the city to Rome, to the Roman Empire. It was the first city to build a temple to the divinity of Julius Caesar. The Lord refers to himself in this letter as he which hath the sharp sword with 2 edges. In Roman thinking, the sword was the symbol of the highest order of official authority invested in the proconsul of Asia. The right of the sword, jus gladii, was similar to the power of life and death. The governors of the provinces were divided into the higher and lower class, according to whether or not they were invested with this power. The Lord wears this symbol of supreme authority. It's interesting to relate to, just like was brought out in that seminar. It's not that the Lord used these symbols just because they were used by the pagans and stuff, but he usually showed his supremacy over them, and I believe he brought them about sometimes to show how he was greater than. An example is the plagues. Each one of the plagues, remember we took, each one referred to a certain god of the Egyptians and how he overcame them. He's the one that controlled all this. And the same with this stuff. He did things that they would understand and show, I'm greater than this. Reference is also made to a white stone. This may refer to the custom of marking days of festivity by a white stone and the days of calamity with a black stone. Or it may refer to the custom in a court of law of marking the guilt of a person with a black stone and the acquittal of accused with a white stone. And that part he says, I'll give this person a white stone when we come to that, when he talks about it. Some see in the white stone a reference to the tessera, a white stone given to those invited to partake of the sacred feast with the temple precincts. Thyatira was the false church. Thyatira itself was once a great military city. It was built by Seleucus I to guard the mouth of the long pass between Hermus and Caicus valleys. Very nice word. Its tutelary god was Tyrimnus, depicted as the warrior armed for battle with a great 2-edged axe. To the church in this city, the Lord depicts himself as the one with the flaming eyes and feet of military bronze. At this period in history, Rome ruled the nations with a rod of iron, smashing to pieces any kingdom which dare oppose her might. The Lord promises the overcomer authority to rule the nations with a power greater far than that of either Rome or Tyrannus. Sardis was the fruitless church. The city was once the capital of Lydia, seat of the fabulous wealthy Croesus. In fact, there's a saying that goes around, as rich as Croesus. We don't say it too much up here, but they say it down in the south. Looked at from a little distance to the north in the open plains, Sardis had a haughty, unconquerable aspect, dominating the majestic broad valley. It was like basically built on a little bit of a mountain. And they thought they were really secure, so secure, they got haughty about it. And this is, we'll see, is their downfall. From its stronghold on a steep spur that stood out in bold relief from the great mountains on the south. But close at hand, the hill was obviously nothing but mud. It wasn't solid rock it was built on, but mud. Slightly compacted, crumbling under the influence of the weather, ready to tumble from the slightest disturbance. It was an appearance without reality, an outward show of strength undermined by neglect and careless confidence. The history of Sardis has been one of glory, yet it was a glory tarnished by unreliability and failure. Twice during its history it had fallen to plundering enemies because of its lack of watchfulness, and that's the whole key for Sardis. They didn't watch. They're so secure in their orthodoxy, so secure as we look at it, they thought these fortresses, they weren't watching. And in fact, I heard about how they fell. Their armies came, it looked impossible. They watched. The guards, one guard was there, his hat fell off. He went out near the night, he went out and took a group with him. They went by the pass, the secret way, went and got to the helmet, and so they realized it's not impossible. They get in somehow. They watched, and then the whole army went up there the night. There's no guards guarding that entrance at all. No watchfulness. They were too self-secure. And so we'll see that's what the church was like. Likewise, the church at Sardis is characterized by the Lord as having a great name for being alive, whereas actually was dead. In Rome times, it was the common practice for cities to keep a roll of its citizens. Unworthy citizens had their name erased from the register. Those who performed this, where it says, I'll blot your name out. Those who performed some exploit had their names written in gold. A hint of this is seen in the Lord's promise to the overcomer not to erase his name from the book of life. Philadelphia was the feeble church. The city was founded by Attalus, king of Pergamus, who intended to make Philadelphia a center of Greco-Asiatic civilization and a means of spreading Greek language and custom in eastern parts of Lydia and Phrygia. He also, I think, built this for his brother, where it's got its name. Philadelphia, care or love for a brother. And I think he dedicated it to his brother. It was a missionary city, founded to promote a unity of spirit, customs, and loyalty within the realm. It was a successful teacher. Before AD 19, the native tongue had ceased to be spoken in Lydia, and Greek was the only language of the country. The church in Philadelphia was a missionary-minded one, dedicated to the spread of the gospel. Philadelphia commanded a key situation on the main line of communication between Rome and the central plateau of Asia Minor. Its strategic location made it possible for it to open or to close these lines of communication. The Lord reveals himself in the letter of Philadelphia as he that hath the key of David, and he that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. Twice during the first century, the city was renamed, once in honor of Tiberius, and once in honor of Vespasian. The Lord said of the church at Philadelphia that it had not denied his name, and also that he would give it a new name. So they could identify with this, the people of the city and the church. Laodicea, which is the last one, was the fashionable church. The city was renowned for its prosperity. More than once, the city recovered itself from disaster without seeking imperial aid. Earthquake and stuff, and they said no. Very prideful, this church. When destroyed by an earthquake in AD 62 in the days of Nero, it declined the offer of help from the imperial government, boasting that it had need of nothing. And of course, this is what the believers were like too. Very interesting. Laodicean bankers were famous even in Rome. They had the reputation of never adulterating the gold they issued to their clients. Laodicea was noted too for its raven-colored wool. It boasted a medical school and was renowned for the manufacture of a special eye ointment that supposedly stung at first but then alleviated certain pains and ailments. All these things are reflected in the Lord's words to the church at Laodicea. The wealthy, boastful believers were instructed to buy from the Lord gold, tried in the fire, to anoint their eyes with eyesalve, and to acquire from him raiment of purest white. Now, looking at it practically again, Ephesus, the formal church, is reminded of the presence of the Lord. He that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, who walketh in the midst of the 7 golden candlesticks. Smyrna, the fearful church, is reminded of the position of the Lord. He is the first and last, which was dead and is alive. Pergamos, the faltering church, is reminded of the possession of the Lord. He has the sharp sword with 2 edges. Thyatira, the false church, is reminded of the perception of the Lord. He has eyes like a flame of fire, and his feet are like the fine brass. Sardis, the fruitless church, is reminded of the power of the Lord. He is the one with the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. Philadelphia, the feeble church, is reminded of the prerogative of the Lord. He openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, no man openeth, showing the power is in him. Laodicea, the fashionable church, is reminded of the person of the Lord. He is the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of creation of God, which is interesting because they wouldn't take the witness from anyone else. They were so proud. But he's the one that is faithful and true. Now, the church is viewed perennially through time. I think we're just going to get through the introduction here. Sheesh. Okay. Ephesus sets before us the issue of fundamentalism. The picture is that of the church busy and outwardly sound, but notably lacking in love, especially in love for Christ. At Smyrna, the perennial problem to be faced is ritualism. The problem at Pergamos is clericalism, setting up a separate caste in this church to officiate the matters religiously, or religious matters. Thyatira confronts the issue of sacerdotalism. Sardis, the perennial problem is liberalism. Sardis had a great reputation as live, dynamic, successful, but is actually dead. In Philadelphia, we see the existence of revivalism in the church. For this church, the Lord has nothing but praise. At Laodicea, we see materialism. It has ever been the enemy's tactic to seduce the church when he could not subdue her. So, now the church is viewed prophetically. We have the post. Now this one is the third view. One is that, okay, it's literal churches. One is that these can also be applied to churches of every era in the church age. The third view, and this is we'll put it down because it's comparison, and you can see this little chart. It kind of summarizes it. Those who believe it corresponds to certain ages of church history. Ephesus, they say, is the apostolic church, AD 30 to 100, and they show the commendation, the condemnation, counsel, and a challenge. Smyrna, they say, is the persecuted church, AD 100 to 312. Pergamos is the indulgent church, 312 to 606. Thyatira is the pagan church, 606 to the tribulation. Now they see, remember the other one had the division. For some reason it goes the plea and then the promise, and in these last 4, for some reason it flips it over. So the first 3 they say are done. They say these other 4 still kind of continue, and we can't see the effects because the pagan church, Thyatira, they link up. The ones that hold this view link up with Rome. Well, Rome is still around and is still powerful. Sardis, the dead church, they link with the Protestant Reformation. Philadelphia, the church that Christ loved, is from AD 1750 to the rapture. It's still kind of continuing. And finally, the Laodicean, the lukewarm church, is near the church at the very end till finding the rapture of the church. So that's in your notes there, and we'll go through it because we'll see what it says. I think that's one of the least views, because the problem with that is if that was the majority view, then of course these were written to those churches at the time. I think it can be true that these may be there, but again, a lot of guys they can't exactly settle on the dates. Not all the things that are in the letter to the church actually fit into the events that happened in history. You really got to kind of force it, and some of it are left out. Some of the warnings and all this. So it can generally be there. I'm sure, again, when we see the eternal revelation of God laid before us for eternity, we'll see things that we've never seen before. And this may be one of them. And right down to the exact thing. but it in itself doesn't give any. In itself, I guess I'll leave this part. Just give me the sign. It in itself, it doesn't have us do anything, because then, if that's true, then the message to the church of Ephesus, if the main thing is just showing the apostolic period, well, then it's all done with. There's nothing we really can glean from it. I think the majority view is it was to the literal churches at the time, and to us all through church age, because the body of Christ is unchanging. It's still the same. The characteristics are the same. That's a tertiary or third type of view, like third degree of importance. And we'll also have there, we'll look at tomorrow, is the some who hold to, now that's a historical type view, some who still hold to a preterist view, in which it's fulfilled by 70 AD. See this, mainly they're the ones that come to theologians, see no distinction between the church and Israel. See this actually referring to, these churches actually referring to events of Israel. Coming out of the land, all this, we'll look at that. And that's how they view it. But of course, just by saying that Israel's the church, I think it's not. It's interesting, and it may have an application, may have a semblance of what happened. And you can kind of see things for an illustration, but I don't think it was the purpose. So tomorrow, we're behind. Tomorrow we'll do the church of Ephesus and also try to do the church of Smyrna. The church is viewed prophetically. We have the apostolic, thank you, church reflected in the letter to Ephesus, particularly in the phrase "Thou art fallen," 2:5. And that's where they tie it in. Now remember, when we look at it this way, I think this is a tertiary or a third degree type view. It could be very well true, like I said before. But there's a lot of discrepancies, even for those who kind of hold to this view, thinking this is the majority view. This is the majority way of interpreting it. They can't really agree on the dates. Not all the events mentioned in each of the listing of the churches actually happened in that age. You have to spiritualize a lot of them. And really all they can do is take a key word here and there. Now, it could be true. And it could have been an outline of the church age. And that's why it's 7 is finally coming to completeness. And as you saw, I made reference to the chart. The first 3 are done. The last 4, and you notice that even grammatically there was a change in the last 4, compared to the plea and then the promise, are still kind of continuing until the end. But some have seen it this way. You can see, maybe a bit by application, spiritualizing a bit and seeing application, it could be. And you could see it like that. But I think primary application was to those specific churches. Secondary applications to us. As the church, we have everything similar with them. They were the body then, we're the body now. So part of the body universal. I believe those 7 churches represent really 7 churches that are in existence today. Each one is evaluated by those. And individuals, because that's what the body is made up of, individuals. Each individual could be like one of those churches in a sense to the similarities. Like as we'll see in Ephesus, as one who's doing a lot of works, very orthodox, very fundamental, keeping to the Word of God, yet lacking that first love, which motivates that proper motivation. And so that could be maybe even a stage in a believer's personal growth that they go through, or something that happens. They let wane. So those, I believe, are the first and secondary interpretations. This is a third degree one, but we'll go through it anyways. So we have the post-apostolic church, as we said in Ephesus, for the phrase, "Thou art fallen." Well, in fact, if you just want to turn to chart, and then we'll read what I have written there, but you can see the commendation that, okay, and this relates to the apostolic, AD 30 to 100. They had good works, they were patient, they hated the Nicolaitans, and we'll look at what that meant. Commendation, condemnation, they left their first love. They were still doing this, but it wasn't the same. Counsel, repent. Remember where you had fallen, get back there, repent. And the challenge, I will give to eat of the tree of life. The Smyrna church, is known as the persecuted church. And they say it covers, and this is general, from AD 100 to 312. And why 312? 12, these are key events. That's, I think, the Edict of Milan, when finally, I think it's Clement. No, that's not right. You guys took church history. Clement of Rome, of Alexandria, Rome, who took over and conquered. The first Roman emperor who finally Christianized Rome. He took it on. But anyways, it was at this edict that it was done. So they say the persecuted church because, after 312. Before that was persecuted because of the different Caesars and that. And you have tribulation, poverty, and affliction. Condemnation, not one word. Because they're suffering and they're being faithful. The counsel is fear not, be faithful. Continue. Challenge, shall not be hurt of the second death. Then Pergamos is the indulgent church from 312 to 606. They held fast his name, denied not his name, but they had the false teachers of Balaam and Nicolaitans, who they didn't deal with. Their counsels, repent. Then Thyatira, they say, relates to the pagan church. AD 606, the tribulation, which you can, it's interesting, look at the pictures of the churches too, the buildings, they kind of represent the time and the emphasis, the style of the church. You can see it's very Romanistic, and that's the idea, it's the Roman church. And it says it's going to go right through the tribulation. This part has started, because it's true. The true believers will be raptured out. You're still going to have a church, or I don't like that word, a Christianization type thing, or a religious view that'll go into the tribulation. They had good works, love, ministry, faith, and patience. You see, you really can't see that. And during that, especially during the Dark Ages, how can you get that out of it? But anyways, this is the commendation. The condemnation is it suffers Jezebel to teach idolatry and compromise. And you can see that associated with it. Counsels hold fast till he comes. Sardis is the dead church. Now, even you have some of those who are of Reformed theology not take offense to this. They say, how could the Reformation be dead? Alive but dead. And so they don't like this interpretation for that reason. But you can see it. The Reformed Church, you can't be too hard on them. When it was Luther and that, when they finally protested against the doctrines, the major doctrine of the Catholic Church being salvation by works, just like anything, when it first starts out, it just starts out. Later on, when you keep adding to it, then it refines itself. You think of in the area of computers. When they first started out, the computers took whole buildings just to do a simple math calculation. Now, after being refined and added upon, if you look at it and you compare the two, you say, oh, well, how crass it was, the old computers. Well, they just started out. It was the same with the Reformation Church. Sure, they still had a lot of the doctrines that the Roman Catholic Church had, but dealing with eschatology and all this kind of stuff. But they were just dealing with the basics. They were just starting to get away. So you could see it. They were alive, but yet dead still in their acts. Philadelphia is the church that Christ loved, and they say that started about AD 1750 to the rapture. Basically saying this is the start of missionary work. This is the church that the Lord loved. There's not one word of condemnation. They're not denying Him, keeping word. They're really trusting in Him. They're going on. Then finally, the Laodicean church. You can see it looks like a real modern church. That's why they put that picture there. The lukewarm church, they say this will finally be the last of the different types. And they say AD 1900. That's the start of the rationalization. The modern theologian is finally being listened to type thing. And you get Bultmann and all these other ones that people are listening to, and it's really split. You have the liberals now and questioning a lot of things, and so you have the liberal church. Not one word of commendation. It's interesting. Lukewarm, blind and naked. So just going through what we have written, the letter to Smyrna begins to focus the persecuted church. This is crystallizing the statement, tribulation in 10 days. That's where they get it from. 10 distinct outbursts of persecution under pagan Caesars, as we'll see later. The final outbreak lasted 10 years. The patronized church is brought into focus in the letter to Pergamos. The phrase, the doctrine of Balaam, sums up what happened. If you cannot curse them, then corrupt them, was the essence of his doctrine. And it's truly what you could see. Rome had always tried to persecute through the Caesars. Finally couldn't squelch or crush the Christian witness with the next leader to take the throne when he had, and it's interesting, if you look at the symbol he had, it was not a Christian cross. It was a Egyptian symbol. And he put that on his thing and said people took it as the cross, and he related it to the cross and stuff, and he called himself a Christian, but by his acts and everything it doesn't even look like he was saved, but yet he made it popular then to be a Christian. And so it was like, that would be let me look at my notes. I think it's
Oh, you mean at first around 300? I know what you mean.
Yeah, I want to get his name because I keep.
Is this Augustine?
No, not Augustine. That's the theologian. This guy was one of the, like a Caesar. He had taken over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought his name was Clement, but I don't think it's.
I realize who you're referring to now. I understand. I just can't think of the name.
Yeah. Well, we'll come to it. But anyways, he's the one that made it. Well, what happened, it was actually worse for the church. Before, when they were being persecuted, it was like being gold through fire. It's being purified. You had those that really didn't commit to the Lord, whatever, they left. You know, there were those that made false professions, didn't last too long because it would cost them their life, cost them livelihood. And so it was purifying. It was an excellent church at that time. When it was finally accepted by the public, a respectable thing even, people would claim to be Christian who weren't saved just because it was the thing to do of the royal court. Well, this is the whole purpose. The whole point is, well, it's like if you can't curse them, the doctrine of Balaam, well then what you try to do is, where am I? Corrupt them. And you can think of Balaam when he tried to curse him. God wouldn't let him curse the nation of Israel, but he had been paid by the king of Moab to curse them, and he couldn't. So he said, well, I'll tell you what to do. Send out your women. And they corrupted them. And so that's what happened. It corrupted the church. And from one there went astray. Then the next part is the letter to Thyatira. We have a forecast of the papal church. The phrase, that woman Jezebel, 2:20, gives the clue to this. In Sardis, we have the prophetic glimpse of the Protestant church. The very essence of Protestantism is summed up in the words, a name that thou livest and art dead. And again, of course, those that are still hold to Reformed theology just boil at that. I mean, how could you say it was dead? But we would say because of the work still continuing, some of them. But some of the names of those of the Reformation were Wycliffe, Huss, Luther, Zwingli, Knox, and Calvin. Now the practical church is seen in a letter to Philadelphia. The phrase, an open door. And you can see it too with revivals and also missions starting. And it epitomizes the period. Men like John and Charles Wesley, Moody and Finley, Carey, Livingston, Hudson Taylor, Adoniram Judson mark this period. Then the present day church is seen in Laodicea. Its character summed up in the word lukewarm. The present day church is wealthy, worldly, and riddled with compromise, cults, and carnality. This is exactly what will happen when, at his coming, the true church is caught up to be with him, and apostate church is left behind.
Maybe someday that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see how they explain that.
I think
want to be here for it, man.
that's for sure. In one way or another, the last four of the churches are to survive until the return of Christ. Note verses 2:25, where it says, but that which ye have already, hold fast till I come. Also in 3:3, remember therefore how thou hast received and heard, and hold fast and repent. If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee. Thou shalt not know what hour I will come upon thee. And also 11 and 20. Behold, I come quickly. Hold fast. 20. I will come into him and sup with him. That's kind of loose. And the other two seem like judgment. But they're saying the idea that he's supposed to return and he's to be around. I think it's stretching it a bit. But anyways, and this can only be now fulfilled if these four churches specifically represent stages of church development which persist until the end of the age. That was by Morris. The one at Ephesus, judgment on the false apostles. Smyrna, judgment on the false Israel. Pergamum, judgment on the evil king and false prophet. Thyatira, judgment on the royal harlot. Now, another way of looking at it, comparatively, are those who are post-millennial and on-millennial see, again, that there's no distinction between Israel and the church. None. That they're the exact same thing. Therefore, they see this actually relating to periods in Old Testament history. And that's how it's related. Well, again, it may relate in picture form. You know, it could relate and you could draw a spiritual application from a picture form, but I don't think it's the primary, secondary, even tertiary interpretation. But they say these 7 churches are related to 7 periods of church history. Notice they call it church history in the Old Testament. That's not true. Church history started at Acts 2, but Ephesus, they say the language of paradise is evident throughout the passage. So they say it starts right at the garden. Smyrna, the situation of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, and the children of Israel in Egypt appears to be reflected in the words of this message. So it's like Ephesus, you lost your first love, and then Smyrna, going through now, Smyrna was the doctrine of Balaam. Pergamum, they said the imagery in this section is taken from the sojourn of Israel in the wilderness, the abode of demons. Thyatira, they say, is St. John now turns to imagery from the period of the Israelite monarchy and Davidic covenant. Sardis, they says the imagery of this section comes from the later prophetic period leading up to the end of the monarchy. Philadelphia says return from exile under Ezra and Nehemiah, and it is reflected in this message, which speaks in the imagery of the synagogue and rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple. So in other words, it's like that open door and them coming back to Jerusalem and stuff. And that's how they relate it. And Laodicea, they say, the period of the last days, AD 30 to 70, provides the motifs for the 7th and last message. So, but that's what they have. Now, looking specifically, that's the introduction to chapters 2 and 3, the message to Ephesus. And just some of the outlines. We had on Ephesus looking at the authority, the approval, the admonition, the adjuration, and the award. Also the identification or incredible knowledge, ignorance, instruction, reward. Looking at the authority, recognizing the good points, correcting your wrongful ways, paying attention, great rewards. And for outline, our outline, we'll be looking at the prologue, then the praise, and the problem, the plea, and then the promise for Ephesus, the message of Ephesus. Let's just read through it to get an idea in our mind. Unto the angel of the church of Ephesus write, these things, what am I going to do? How about we go around, Tracy, you can read verse 1, and verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5, verse 6. We'll get some participation here.
Unto the angel of the church of Ephesus write, these things said, he that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, who walketh in the midst of the 7 golden mountains.
Okay.
2, sorry.
Okay. I know thy works and thy labor and thy patience, and thou canst not bear them which are evil, and thou hast tried them which say they are apostles, and are not, and hast found them liars.
And has borne and has patience, and for my name's sake has labored, and not fainted.
Nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love.
Remember therefore from whence thou art fallen, and repent, and do the first works, or else I will come unto thee quickly, and will remove thy candlestick out of his place, except thou repent.
But this thou hast, that thou hatest the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate.
He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of paradise of God.
Okay. So the church at Ephesus is the only church in the New Testament to which two apostles addressed letters. Apostle John, Apostle Paul. When Paul wrote to Ephesus, it was the climatic church of the day. And it was, you think it had the school of Tyrannus in there? Stephanus. It was known probably that because of the school and the Apostle Paul teaching there for 2 years, that outwent workers that went to areas that he never got to. I think Colossae is one of them, and other different churches. It's also said that also in that church were Aquila and Priscilla, a famous discipling couple. Also Alexander was said to have gone there. You had the Apostle John, who's said to have stayed there after. So it was quite the church was really blessed for those who went there, and the teaching of the Word, I'm sure, that went forth from there. Which would make sense for the way they were spiritually as a church. Very right and divide the word of truth according to the apostles' doctrine. They were able, as we'll see, they were able to pick out in an instant a false prophet or one who claimed to be apostle. They were to pick them right out, but their love. I wanted to read something for Phillips. And again, I really recommend this book. If you're doing something, you're reading through the book, you want something a little more devotional and stuff, this is the one to get. He's got good information. He has done an excellent job. The next one for a little more technical or comparative type study not is Walvoord, is good. And then the third one by Morris is not too bad. But there's a section here he does for an introduction. It'd be interesting to do it for every church through here. Introduction, trying to relate. If you went to the meeting, what you would see. Of course, he's done a little bit of modern terms in here, but it's interesting because this, I believe, describes the church of Ephesus. In fact, I'm going to wait just a minute till we get. I want to just do the introduction here first. Just bait you a bit. It's really good too. In the prologue, part number 1. Verse 1, we have the prologue. Unto the angel of the church of Ephesus write. The Greek word angelos, which has been transliterated in English word angel, is frequently used in the Bible of angels, as we know them as. However, it is often used also of men in Greek literature as a whole, just basically meaning a messenger, right? Several instances, the word referred to human messengers in the Bible. Can you look at Matthew 11:10, please? Mark 1 and 2. Luke 7:24 and 27. Luke 9:52. So you see there's a couple of key areas in which you have a lot of debate. One, this is one of them. Who are the angels? We talked a bit about that in the introduction. Okay, Matthew 11:10.
For this is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, who shall prepare the way before thee.
Right, it's talking about John the Baptist. And, no, it's not. Read that again.
It is from John the Baptist.
It is, eh? Okay. Who is, of course, a person, but that word's angelos. Same word. So he's not sending an angel. We know it's John. It's a person. Mark 1 and 2.
As it is written in the prophets, Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare thy way before thee.
Okay, to me that's just a parallel passage. Luke 7:24 and 27.
When the messengers of John were departed, he began to speak unto the people concerning John. 27. This is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, who shall prepare the way before thee.
Okay, so 27 relates back to the other three. 24 talks about an individual sent by John to Jesus to ask him that question. You know, are you the Messiah, or will you look for another? And 9:52.
And sent messengers before his face, and they went and entered into the village of the Samaritans to make ready for him.
Okay, it's talking about disciples and Jesus sending them. So
The word messengers is this.
it's the same, exact same word, yeah. So now actually, when we use the word angel,